One of our experts just got back from a summer vacation to Havana, and he tells us all about the Cuban car culture. Plus, we just bought a new Ram 1500 pickup to put through our testing. And we answer your questions, next on Talking Cars. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm John Lincove.
I'm Keith Barry.
I'm Gabe Shenhar.
And summer's in full swing. We've got a kind of a skeleton crew here at the track, people getting their use it or lose it vacation done before school or whatever starts up. Keith, you had an interesting vacation that you just got back from. I've got one coming up, but what's up with your vacation look?
Instead of a vacation, let's just nip all those rumors in the bud here.
Twitter is totally blowing up about it, let me tell you.
Who hit Gabe?
Yes.
Yeah, so I had a swimming accident this past Sunday in the Long Island Sound. It's an annual swimming event, kind of fundraiser. I do it every year, and some genius decided that this year there was going to be some section with a two-way traffic, and I had a head-on collision with another swimmer, and apparently my forward collision warning didn't work.
Or your sonar, right?
So my swimming goggle just gashed into me.
So,
yeah.
Oof. Ooh, and how's the other guy?
Yeah. I don't know.
Haven't seen him.
Swim away.
Hit and run.
Hit and run. It's like the big fish that got away. Yeah. Well, anyway, so Keith, a little safer on yours. No visible damage.
No visible damage.
But your summer vacation so far, very interesting. Tell us where you went and some of the cool stuff you saw.
Sure. So I went to Havana, Cuba, and as I'm sure you folks know, it's a really interesting place.
I can imagine.
Really, really interesting. But we're talking cars here. So we'll talk about some of the cars, and I'm sure.
Not politics?
No, just cars. They're intertwined a little bit because, when the revolution took place, there were some restrictions put into place on who could own cars, and that's why people have this view of the whole island is frozen in time with these old American cars built before 1959.
Michael Corleone's still there with his banana
exactly.
Or Fredo, really.
But it's actually not frozen in time because these cars are how people, now the economy's opened up a little bit. These cars are how people make money.
So kind of what are the cars that they have that we're talking about, like frozen in time?
1950s Fords, Chevys, Imperials, a couple of DeSotos, and also a weird mix of like Simcas and Mercedeses. These are the ones that got there before the revolution. And if you had your car, you could keep it. And as a result, people do these kind of crazy things to keep the cars running because it's your lifeline. It isn't just a classic car. Right. It's if you can pick up some tourists and drive them around, you're going to make a ton more money.
We might need to reference the Simca. It's an old French car.
Oh yeah,
not everybody has.
There's some. It's the Galapagos Islands there. There's some weird stuff.
Well, and what I was going to say is that it's hard enough to get parts for old cars here. For the vintage cars.
And imagine there's an embargo and you can't buy any parts from America. So I met with a couple of mechanics while I was there, of course, and I talked to a gentleman who does engine swaps on mid-50s Chevys. He had a 55 Bel Air that he showed me that he had swapped in a Toyota 4-cylinder diesel Hilux engine into it. And for some of the classic car folks out there might think it's sacrilege, but for him, I mean that's how he keeps it running. There was no other alternative. I did see one car with its original engine, and it was a 50 Cadillac 62 with the overhead valve V8, and it was still running. So why fix it?
Right. But was there modern cars too, or is it everything stuck in time?
So
did you rent a car, or did you use public transportation?
We used a lot of taxis. We got in a lot of other people's cars, and it was a great opportunity because everyone wanted to tell you about their cars. And one of those modern cars was a gentleman who actually he worked part-time as sort of a car dealer. So what happens is, restrictions on owning cars have been loosened up a little bit, but cars are still prohibitively expensive due to a number of reasons. So even a kind of a brand new compact Chinese car is going to be like the equivalent of $100,000. So what happens is embassies,
how many years' salary?
The government, exactly, many years' salary. The embassies, the government, they bring in cars, they leave them behind, and when they're done with them, they just somehow end up for sale.
They float around into the economy.
And this guy I met, he was actually driving a Citroen ZX. He was really proud of it, but he brokered deals. He got a friend an Audi A6.
That was actually a good car. I drove that car once.
The ZX, yeah.
chassis. Yeah,
On some of the
drove
rougher
really
roads
well.
there,
I mean, it
he
was falling
absolutely
apart.
loved it. Yeah, and he showed the way that you trade these cars and drive them around. And the newer cars were all Ladas and Geelys and even an MG, the new MG.
No, but China. MG,
Exactly,
right.
China MG. And it seemed like people preferred the American cars, number one. A lot of them they liked the Mercedes 5-cylinder diesel engine, put that in a lot of cars. There's a lot you can read about on.
There's a lot you can read about, and I'm sure your blog will cover a lot more of it. Gabe, this spurred a discussion that we had about kind of the outlier cars that we've all been able to drive when we had travels, and you had an interesting one because of, I think, the size of the vehicle where it was.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago we went to Italy. It was like an expanded family vacation, so I wanted a big car, and I got to rent a Mercedes Vito. So in Europe there aren't really any modern minivans. They're all commercial minivans with seats bolted inside there. So the Mercedes Vito is one
It's
of
the other
those.
Corleone.
And it's kind of close to the Metris that's sold here, but much more basic than that. It was stick shift, and it was kind of fun to drive on the hills of Tuscany. And
you had a big family with you.
Yeah, big family, room for everyone. Yeah, I mean,
It was La Dolce Vito.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there were a few hairy moments, especially in like downtowns, like in Perugia, for instance. I inserted the car into a parallel parking lot somehow. I don't know how. And
You can't even drive like a little Fiat Panda, or
yeah. I mean, there were some other archways and all kinds of alleys. I almost took someone's balcony including the laundry hanging on it with me.
It was there since the 1400s, but Gabe drove through and it's gone.
Yeah, and in Florence, there are all kinds of like limited zones. Like you have signs, zona limitado, everywhere during some parts of the day. So you have to be careful not to enter those zones, but otherwise you get a huge fine. So I had to like stop once and had my son like block traffic, and I was like doing like a endless like back and forth
32-point turn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was really interesting, but it was fun.
I had the opposite of that. I went to Greece on my honeymoon and had a Citroen C3, which I think was about as big as the table and goofy as heck. It was rounded like some of the the older one, the older Citroens, but just this tiny little car for Greece. It worked well driving around on the tiny little roads, kind of whipping around. But you could totally see why this vehicle's not an export to to America or something like that. Let alone the fact that the company's not here, but it's just so cramped, just so basic, so Spartan, so loud, so rough riding. But it was interesting to drive. It was unique.
Speaking of Citroens, and with all my travels back to Israel, I once rented Citroen AX. And Keith will excuse me for saying that this was such a garbage car, because Keith has such a love of French
Not
cars.
all.
But
Not
anyway,
all.
Okay.
I'll give you another one of those.
I mean, the car was so bad, rough riding, noisy, and clunky that I'd have to spend the whole rest of the podcast describing how bad it was.
Well, I think it would be very cool to hear from some of our viewers, some of our audience. Tell us some of the interesting cars that you drove in another country, or even something random that maybe was imported to America or to Canada, something like that. And you could send it to us, TalkingCars@iCloud.com. Send us some videos if you happen to have videos or stills of the car. We'd love to see them. That's going to take us a little bit now to what we've got at the track, and we've got a new pickup truck that a lot of people talk about. Kind of, it's a year of the pickup truck. You're getting the new Chevrolet Silverado and the GMC Sierra, but we just picked up the new Ram 1500. Gabe, give us a little bit of information on what we've got, because there's tons of versions of this truck, from bed lengths to cab sizes and engines. Which one did we get? Tell us why.
We got a crew cab, which is what they sell most.
Yep.
With a 5.7 liter V8 with the e-torque, the optional mild hybrid 48-volt setup, which is the first car that we own with that kind of technology.
And what, just go in a little detail, like what does that do? How's it different than some hybrid systems?
So it's not exactly a hybrid system. It's an alternative based. It's designed to really make stop-start smooth, and also all kinds of accessories that rely on the electrical system. 12 volt is not enough for those things anymore. So 48 volt can support air conditioning without interruption. Because a lot of times you have a start-stop system, and you all of a sudden feel like, you know, the cabin's getting humid,
right?
And the AC is really getting compromised. So this is supposed to support all of these things, make everything very seamless.
So Keith, we all drove it, but
Yeah.
you took it home the other night, spent some time in it. What were your first impressions?
So first thing, I really can't wait to see our actual fuel economy ratings in our tests, because FCA, the parent company Ram, says that it's going to be a 10% fuel economy improvement with that mild hybrid system.
Over the regular 5.7.
Over the regular 5.7, exactly. And it's like an $800 option, I think, as well. So I didn't notice anything different with that mild hybrid, and I was really excited to drive it because we've written about it a lot and we've covered it. It drove like it was quite comfortable. I know that we liked the ride of the last Ram, and wallowed a little bit in sort of higher speeds, but around town it didn't. It felt like a truck, but not as much like a truck. Right. My only complaint was that infotainment system. We had the one with a smaller infotainment system. There's one that has a big screen. We got the kind of smaller one.
Right.
Well,
and
it's still the 8.4
well,
setup.
When it's a million miles away, it feels tiny, and that's the thing. It's
It's a big
location.
cabin.
Yeah, it's a big and that's good.
Right.
But that screen feels pretty far away.
Keith touched on the ride of the last one and how the new one has that similar quality, and it's because of the rear suspension is different than the competitors.
So right, the Ram is unique among full-size pickup trucks that has coil springs instead of leaf springs in the back, and those coil springs make the ride a lot more car-like. It makes it more absorbent, steadier, and not as jittery especially when the bed is empty.
Right. How was it on your drive? Because you have a longer commute than us. You're putting 100-something miles on it. What was it like for your experience, especially on some of the Merritt Parkway, which is a narrow road compared to Interstate 95?
Yeah, no, it's on both of those. The truck was great. I mean, the ride was very civilized. The cabin is really quiet, which is really impressive. I mean, it rivals some luxury cars. The powertrain was smooth and powerful, and even handling wasn't too bad. It was pretty responsive.
Yeah, I found it good around town. I'm shocked at how big the crew cabs is in the rear. It looks like a vehicle you could almost take camping and just sleep inside of it. And it wasn't too hard for my little kids to get up in it. I like the interior. I really like the Ram interiors over its competitors. The only thing is the goofy fake wood. The goofy fake wood.
Yeah, what was the wood on the top?
It's like a piece of plastic that's green, like something gray, and you see like trim. Part of the trim is also in the dash, the IP, up in the instrument panel. But aside from that, everything was really great.
It needs a
really
step.
Nice.
It needs a step.
Yeah, we're gonna get the running boards.
Excellent.
But still, it's a truck. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not one of the small things you see behind, because it could do truck things, and it needs to be taller. In my opinion, I don't find that a big issue. Especially it'll be interesting to see the new Silverado, because the last Chevrolet Silverado, was a little lower, and it was a little easier to get into.
Yeah, Chevy is traditionally lower to the ground and a little more maneuverable and easier to get into.
So it's a huge market. The Ram is a huge player, even if it's number 3 behind the Ford F-150 and the Chevrolet Silverado, or wherever they sit in sales. So we're going to be putting it through our tests. Find more about it on consumerreports.org. So this is going to bring us to the next part of our show, which is probably one of our favorite ones, because we're answering audience questions. So send your videos, send your still photos, send your stories, text messages to TalkingCars@iCloud.com. We get a ton of them. We're going through them, and we're pulling out all the ones we can. Hopefully we can get a couple more question-only episodes if you want to see those. Our first one is a video question. We hear from Nathaniel, and he wants to talk about the Chrysler 200. Take a listen.
Hi, Consumer Reports and Talking Cars. This is Nathaniel. I'm a big fan of Talking Cars, big fan of cars in general. I've been a big fan of Chrysler cars. You're not going to like that too much, but my question is about the Chrysler 200. I have a 2015 and I feel the roughness in the shifts, but I rented a 2016 and it was totally fine. So I really like it. It's way more comfortable than any other midsize car I've ever been in. It doesn't drive as well as the Fusion, but it looks a lot better than Fusion. It's a lot faster, with the exception of the Fusion Sport. I'm a little curious to know, why don't you guys really recommend or like the 200? Just everything else except for the reliability and transmission. Thanks.
Okay, so Gabe, he really thinks that we kind of hit hard on the 200 and unreasonably so. Tell us about it. We tested the 4-cylinder. We tested the 200C with the V6. We really weren't totally thrilled with it.
Yeah, we weren't terribly impressed with the car. The suspension was kind of half-baked. It wasn't really settled. It was a combination of bouncy and uncomfortable. The handling was far from nimble. It felt like a much larger car.
Right.
Also, the visibility was problematic. The rear seat
really swoopy and low down. It looked good, but
rear seat room was not competitive with the segment of midsize sedans. So it kind of ranked. The 4-cylinder was noisy and slow.
Yep.
The V6 was a little nicer, but overall, in a competitive segment like that, the car straight out of the box kind of was lagging.
It's one of those situations where a lot of people I see comment, and even manufacturers do this a lot, where they're like, "Oh, it's all new and better than the last one." Well, thank goodness it's better than the last one, because if you came out and said, the new car is 10% worse than the thing that we just ran for 8 years, I couldn't imagine that. So just being better isn't great. Now, Keith, on the other hand, has
I'm with
a love
you,
affair.
Nathaniel. I'm with you, Nathaniel.
Okay.
I'm with you on this one. So I drove the car. Now I didn't experience it with a 4. I only drove it with a 6, and I drove a car that was really similarly equipped to yours. When I talk to people who own that car, and occasionally I'll run into someone, I'll say, "Hey, how do you like that?" And everyone who owns one tells me that they like it. The problem was, there weren't that many people who bought them because it was this shrinking segment. Because not only are people not buying sedans, but they're not buying small sedans. And this was a sedan that wasn't necessarily as competitive as, say, the Fusion. It wasn't the right size that people were looking for. And even though Chrysler spent, close to $1 billion renovating that Sterling Heights assembly plant for this car, it just wasn't enough. But I like it. I like the trim. I like the look. I have a soft spot for the car. I drove it to New Jersey with 4 people in it and back, and it was
maybe it was a little better like a pickup truck if you have it lady, and rode a little better.
Well, I will say it was a little snug. It was a little snug.
It is snug. I'll agree. It's not like a Ford Fusion, but it really wasn't even like a Toyota Camry. It really wasn't like a Honda Accord. We had, like Gabe said, we said the 4-cylinder and the 6-cylinder. I took the 4-cylinder way into Pennsylvania for a quick family emergency.
I'm sorry.
Well, the emergency was okay, but the car was a miserable experience. Like you said, it's the weakest player in a shrinking segment, and there just wasn't a reason for it. And look, FCA, Fiat Chrysler, America.
They pulled the plug on that quick.
The Dodge
the Dart.
they're going. They have some nice vehicles. They're far away from the old Jeep Patriot, Dodge Caliber era of those plastic fantastic
compare
things.
that interior to the Sebring, or even the 200 that came before it, and you're right. And I do like the car. So I'm with you.
Anyone who expected a smaller version of a Chrysler 300, which is a really nice car, was disappointed.
And we're going to move to another question now. We're going to talk about what Ken has a question here. He wants to ask about fog lights and if they're necessary for safety. So roll the tape.
Hey, Talking Cars. I've got a question about fog lights. When buying a car, safety is at the top of my list. Just recently, I bought a car that is rated Top Safety Pick Plus. Belatedly, I've realized that the car has no fog lights. How serious was that omission? Did somebody just blow it? Or are fog lights just a gimmick? Thanks, and keep on talking cars.
So Keith, what do you think? Fog lights, necessary, unnecessary? Did he make a mistake?
I think some guess who forgot to put the fog lights in. Anyhow, someone did.
Yes.
So what I've seen is that modern lighting is pretty much taking the place of fog lights in a lot of cars. So I think it really depends on the vehicle, where you live. I know you talked to our own Jen Stockberger, who has a lot to say about this. Has been quoted all over the world talking about fog lights.
Yeah, she's world renowned.
Yeah.
Jen said, first of all, they fill in below the headlights, so it helps out. but we actually rate vehicles for veiling glare, which is kind of how the headlight disperses up. And she says that what we're seeing now is that a lot of the LED headlights are cutting down on that, so it helps. We're seeing some minimal to no glare like that with headlights, but we don't rate fog light performance. She also pointed out night vision systems actually are really helpful because they can see through the fog, and also
Right, because
radar
they're based
and
on
lidar.
infrared and heat. But anyway, fog lights, it's kind of a misnomer. It's been for years, they indicate you got the higher version trim
sport
of,
version, right.
of a car. So, but they help in kind of like the proximity lighting, just close to you. But one thing I'd like to add is rear fog lights. And it's a requirement for European cars sold in Europe, and it's a high intensity red fog light, and you're much more visible following it, like heavy rain or fog. And I actually like those.
But please, if you drive an Audi or a Volvo, turn your rear fog lights off when it's not
daylight,
foggy.
yes,
if
yes,
there's
yes.
this button that's pressed and you don't know what it is and there's something glowing in the dashboard, you're probably shining this really bright red light into the face of the person who's behind you. So
And
turn
people
that off.
think you have your brakes on.
Yep,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah, especially some of the older cars. I know the Audi A6 wagon had both. So
Yeah.
it looks like brake lights. Taking a quick look around here, there's not a lot of cars that might have fog lights at all. So Ken is correct that they are going away.
Oh, one reference to the Top Safety Pick Plus. I mean, that's an Insurance Institute for Highway Safety reference that he's making.
Yeah, and they rate lights, but not the fog lights. And then it is interesting. Some cars can be a Top Safety Pick Plus because they have good lights. The other version that doesn't have the lights is only a Top Safety Pick. So that's back and forth. We do our own testing on headlights and incorporate that into our rating and our overall score. We're going to move to another question here.
Oh, I can't wait for this one.
Yeah, Keith, show everyone your research.
I've done research.
Oh, that's more than research.
I've got
That's
deep undercover.
Deep
a
undercover.
dissertation.
Oh, yeah.
It was just during your layover from Cuba. And,
Oh yeah, this is I did some research.
Okay, you got numbers and scrawls. In your minivan ratings, you recommend the Toyota Sienna, Honda Odyssey, and Chrysler Pacifica, but not the Kia Sedona. The Sienna isn't a top safety pick, and the Odyssey and Pacifica aren't as reliable as the Grand Caravan. The Sedona is also $10,000 to $12,000 Canadian, cheaper than your recommended vehicles here in Ontario. What gives? Is there something wrong and something that I'm missing?
Well, the thing you're missing is international trade policy, and it goes all the way to the top.
So wait, so this is our wonk time,
Yeah,
right?
this
Okay.
is bigger than all of us. All kidding aside,
Right.
there actually are, I talked to one of our analysts here, and there is a difference in trade policy between the US and Korea and Canada and Korea. As a result, Korean cars tend to cost a little bit less in Canada than they do in the US. So you're actually finding about a $4,700 difference for a comparable car between the US and Canada for the Kia that you're talking about. Okay. So that car, you're going to save about $5,000 by driving over the border and picking it up. If that were legal, it's not.
Right, you can't do that.
You can't do that. But you're lucky if you're in Canada, you get access to cheaper Kias. Now, the other difference is that some of the trim levels are a little different, and the pricing is a little different because of what the market will bear. Sure. But basically, this car is a much better value in Canada than it is in the United States.
So even
You're still
even at that value, though.
Yeah, even at
You're
that
still
value.
getting the stiff ride, and you're getting the second row seats that are not foldable, and you have to remove them, or
And
you
that's
can't even remove them.
No, you can't. Yeah, they're the weird sliders.
Which really counteracts all the versatility that you should expect in a minivan.
So, but it scores a couple points lower, so it's just right below our threshold for recommendation. Because of factors like that. But still, for that much of a savings, it might be something I would consider if you don't need to load a sheet of plywood in it regularly. If it's just family transport.
If going in you're aware of all those shortcomings, then sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Save some loonies and toonies.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Loonies and toonies. All right, so speaking of loonies and toonies, the three of us are going to answer one more question if we can get through it. I have a growing family and need a bigger vehicle. What vehicle would you recommend for me? Keep in mind that I need 3 rows of seating and I don't make a lot of money, so mileage and price are important. By the way, I would absolutely love a job testing and reporting on cars, so I'm crazy jealous. We're not hiring, I'm sorry. But anyway, let's get back to the
I'm jealous of you
question at hand.
too, John.
Gabe, growing family, affordable, people move around a budget.
So it's unclear what kind of budget he has, but my first inclination would be go for a used Toyota Sienna, 4 or 5 year old for $20,000. If you want to swing a new car, then probably your best bet is a Kia Sorento. Get the 4-cylinder, and you probably can swing it below $30,000.
Yeah, it's a nice SUV. You could even get front-wheel drive, I think.
Yeah, front-wheel drive. You don't need the all-wheel drive. If you're in the Sun Belt, sure.
Yep. So, Keith, any suggestions on there?
If you're in Canada, definitely go for the Kia.
Well, I was going to say, too bad he couldn't bring it.
But I mean, I like where you're going with the idea of minivan. I personally like the Odyssey a lot, especially if you don't need that all-wheel drive that's available on the Sienna.
Yeah,
But
I'll say though that if you're buying used, you probably
Yeah.
want to maximize on the reliability, and the Sienna has an edge over the Odyssey there.
If you're used, you're right. But I just in general, I like the idea of a minivan because you're going to get a lot more value and a lot more space for your dollar when it comes to that. You don't necessarily need that that SUV, and it's also going to be better on fuel economy too for you. So don't worry about the looks. The minivan is cool in its own way.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was up at the place that built my bicycle up in Boston.
Okay.
And right down Dorchester. And anyway, the one of the owners was saying like, oh, I got to get rid of my WRX and my Tacoma and get one vehicle.
That's such a bike shop owner
yes.
car duo. Yep.
And he said, as much as I want to get a 4Runner, I really want to get a minivan. He goes, it's the stigma, but it's so useful, and I can throw everything in there and the baby and the family. So perfect choice. I would look at, if you're looking for an SUV, maybe a used Highlander, Toyota Highlander, maybe a used Honda Pilot, and also a Chevrolet Traverse. Reliability of the last couple years is above average. A couple years before that, average. So a nice vehicle, and you may be able to get that for a little less money than the Toyota or the Honda.
Yeah.
The Toyota Highlander, by the way, holds its value very well. If you're buying it used, it's probably better than buying stock.
Right. So you step in, a little higher price point to get in, but you're gonna get more out of it.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, that's going to do it for this episode. As always, send us your texts and your questions to TalkingCars@iCloud.com. Also, check the show notes below. For more information, go to consumerreports.org. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.